18 years. An entire nation living under foreign occupation. Farmers handing over grain they had grown themselves. Families watching a foreign king settle into land that had belonged to their fathers. Children growing up inside that reality, as if it were simply how the world worked. Because for them, it was. 18 years is long enough to make people stop believing things could be different. And when God decided to move, He did not send what anyone gathered in that land would have hoped for. No commanding general with a battle record. No well-known prophet whose name carried weight. No figure that would cause heads to turn and people to say, "Yes, that one." Of course, that makes sense. He sent a left-handed man from a tribe whose very name means son of the right hand. His name was Ehud. The Bible gives him 16 verses, no long backstory, no public credentials, no ceremony of recognition. Just a name, a tribe, a hand, and a window of time that would open once and close forever. This is Judges chapter 3. And there is more in these 16 verses than most people slow down long enough to find. Before we continue, if you want to keep exploring biblical stories the way the text actually tells them, without skipping the hard parts, subscribe now and turn on notifications. More of these are coming. To understand Ehud, you first have to understand the weight his generation was living under. Not as distant historical background, but as something that pressed down on real people every single day. Judges 3:12 opens with a line that runs through the entire book like a refrain. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. That single word, again, carries the whole structure of the book in it. This is not the first time. The people are already inside a cycle. Disobedience, occupation, crying out to God, deliverance, rest. And then the wheel turns again. By the time we reach Ehud's story, that cycle has already turned at least once. And now it has turned again. The nation pressing down on Israel at this point is Moab, positioned east of the Dead Sea and across the Jordan River. The two peoples had a complicated shared history. Ruth, who would eventually become the great-grandmother of King David, was herself a Moabite woman. Moab and Israel were not always enemies, but under King Eglon, Moab had become the occupying power. Eglon built a coalition. He joined forces with the Ammonites and the Amalekites, crossed the Jordan, and seized Jericho. That city carried significance far beyond its geography. Jericho was the first city Israel had ever taken when they entered the land God had promised them under Joshua. Its walls had not fallen through military strategy, but through an unmistakable act of God. Jericho was, in the memory of the people, a monument to what the Lord had done. And now it belonged to someone else. Judges 3:14 records the situation without commentary. The Israelites served Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. Stay with that number. A child born on the first day of that occupation would grow into a young adult who had never known what freedom looked like in practice. Farmers handed over portions of their harvest, not by choice, but by requirement. Families learned to speak carefully, to move carefully, to live inside the constant low weight of having no say in their own land. That heaviness did not live in documents. It lived in homes, at tables, in the silences between people who still remembered how things had been before. And then verse 15 records a turn. The Israelites cried out to the Lord. Not a strategy, not a political formation, a cry, the kind that comes when people have run out of other options. And God answered. He raised up a deliverer for them, Ehud, son of Gera, from the tribe of Benjamin. The way Ehud is introduced in Judges 3:15 is almost deliberately plain. Ehud, son of Gera, the Benjaminite, a left-handed man. That is everything. his father's name, his tribe, the hand he used. Nothing more. No physical description, no speech, no established reputation, no moment where others recognize him as the obvious choice. He simply appears, ready, at the moment God appointed. That restraint in the text is intentional. The book of Judges is not interested in building human legends. Its consistent concern is showing how God works through specific, ordinary, particular people in deeply broken times. The focus never stays on the person. It passes through the person to what God is doing. The tribal detail carries an irony the original audience would have caught immediately. Benjamin in Hebrew is Binyamin, son of the right hand. Benjamin was Jacob's youngest son, born to Rachel, and the tribe that bore his name developed a notable military identity over generations. Later in Judges chapter 20, 700 select Benjaminite warriors are described as left-handed, each capable of slinging a stone at a hair's width and not missing. Left-handedness within Benjamin was not unusual. It appears to have been part of the tribe's own fighting character. The Hebrew phrase used for Ehud, iter yad yamino, literally means restricted in his right hand. Whether this points to someone fully left-dominant or to a man equally capable with both hands, scholars have read it both ways. What is clear is that Ehud moved through the world differently from the majority of people around him. He used his left hand in a world built entirely around the right. And that difference, which in many settings might have been treated as a disadvantage, turned out to be the precise instrument the moment required. The community trusted him with a consequential task. He was appointed to lead the annual tribute delegation to King Eglon, a formal, high-stakes transaction that maintained whatever fragile order existed between a conquered people and the king who held authority over them. The man leading that delegation had to be known, reliable, and capable of arriving and departing without incident. Scripture does not tell us how many times Ehud had made this journey before. It is worth noting, though the text itself does not state this, that by this point he may well have been a familiar face at Eglon's court, a recognized figure, the man who comes every year. That kind of quiet familiarity, if it existed, would have made him nearly invisible in exactly the way he needed to be. Before Ehud set out for Eglon's court, he made something. Judges 3:16 records this with careful, specific language. He made himself a double-edged sword about a cubit long, which he strapped to his right thigh under his clothing. A cubit is roughly 18 inches, around 45 centimeters. This is a short blade. Not a weapon for open battle, not a soldier's sword. It was sized to disappear entirely under a robe, short enough to conceal without a trace, long enough to do exactly what it needed to do. Double-edged means it cuts in both directions without any adjustment or rotation. For a left-handed man drawing across his body, in whatever physical position the moment placed him, the blade would be ready before any hesitation could interrupt. He strapped it to his right thigh. This decision was not a small detail. It was the axis on which the entire plan turned. In the ancient Near East, armed men wore their swords on the left hip, drawn across the body with the right hand. This was the convention. It was so consistent that guards at royal courts were trained around it without question. When searching a visitor arriving for an audience, you check the left side, left hip every time. Because that was where weapons were carried. Always. Ehud's blade was on his right side, hidden beneath his robe, positioned exactly where his left hand would reach without fumbling. Precisely where a guard running through a standard check would not think to look. This level of preparation was not improvised the morning of departure. Someone had thought through how security operated at Eglon's court, what the arrival process looked like, which side the guards moved to first, what angle they would miss entirely. Someone chose the blade length deliberately, made sure it would not shift against the leg during the long walk through the valley, would not catch the fabric of the robe at the wrong moment, would not produce any sound that did not belong. The preparation was complete before the opportunity arrived. Ehud was ready before he knew the exact shape of what was coming. The Bible does not record when this plan formed. It does not tell us what Ehud felt while he shaped the metal, or how many times he went over the steps in his mind before leaving. What the text records is what he did. He made the blade, strapped it on, and walked toward the day. The Jordan Valley in summer is one of the most physically demanding environments in the entire region. The valley floor sits nearly 400 meters below sea level. Heat collects in layers that do not lift or move. The air carries a thickness that turns every step into effort. Between the river and the walls of any city in the valley, there is almost no shelter from the sun at the midday hours. Through that landscape, Ehud led his delegation, a procession of men moving through the weight of the afternoon, carrying goods and silver, the currency of subjugation. They would have looked exactly like what they were, a group completing a required transaction under occupation. A familiar sight at the gates, nothing unusual, nothing to cause a second glance. Judges 3:17 notes, briefly and without drama, that Eglon was a very fat man. The Hebrew word bari means heavy, well-fed. The text records this because it becomes physically relevant to what happens in the upper room. But it also fills in a picture of a king living comfortably, a man at ease on what other people's delivered to him year after year, with no particular reason to be on guard against the men who came every year to settle the account. The tribute was presented. The official business of the visit was completed. Then Ehud sent the delegation ahead of him. Judges 3:18 says simply that after presenting the tribute, he dismissed those who had carried it. They moved on. He did not. Nobody in the court apparently questioned it. Whether follow-up meetings after a tribute delivery were part of the established process, or whether Ehud's regular presence there had made his lingering seem unremarkable, Scripture does not say. What matters is that the distance between him and the others was growing. The court's attention was elsewhere, and Ehud turned back toward the king. He walked past the carved stone images near Gilgal, a landmark the text names but does not describe. Their exact nature is not clarified anywhere else in Scripture. From that point, he made his way back to Eglon. Ehud approached Eglon with words that opened a door no one in that court would have expected him to walk through. "I have a secret message for you, my king." Private messages delivered personally by the head of a foreign delegation were not unusual in courts of that era. Kings received them. The request was not alarming. Eglon responded exactly as Ehud needed. He commanded silence, cleared every attendant from the room, and received Ehud in his upper chamber. That upper room served a practical purpose in the climate of the Jordan Valley. Lower rooms in any structure there trap and hold the heat of the afternoon for hours. An elevated chamber, open on its sides to whatever faint movement the air permitted, stayed noticeably cooler. It was a space for rest, for private conversation, for the kind of word that was not meant for open halls. The king's most unguarded moments happened there. Now the room held two men, a king on his seat, and Ehud standing before him. "I have a message from God for you," Ehud said, and Eglon rose from his seat. Judges 3:20 records this without editorial comment. A Moabite king, the man who had held Israel under his authority for 18 years, stood up when a man from Israel said he carried a word from God. The text offers no explanation for why. Whether it was court protocol, instinct, or something in Eglon's own understanding of who that God was, Scripture does not say. It simply records the action. He stood. That detail is worth sitting with quietly. Eglon did not dismiss the name. He did not wave the moment off. Whatever he believed or knew about the God of Israel, something in him responded to that name with a form of physical reverence. He rose. In the silence of that room, in the heat of the valley afternoon, a king stood before a tribute man from a conquered people. Because the name of God had been spoken. And in that moment, Ehud moved. What followed is recorded in Judges 3:21 and 22, with the same plain, unflinching language the text has kept throughout. Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and drove it into Eglon's stomach. The fat closed around the blade. Even the handle followed. Ehud could not pull it back. The Bible does not dress this in dramatic language. It does not turn it into something other than what it was. It tells you what happened in the language of a record. Because this is a record, and the plainness of that language is itself a kind of honesty that the text never apologizes for. Ehud walked out. He closed and locked the doors of the upper chamber behind him, passed through the porch, and left the building. Without haste, without drawing attention, exactly as he had arrived. When the servants of Eglon returned to the upper chamber, the doors were locked. They paused. The Hebrew text uses a euphemism that any reader of that era would have recognized immediately. They assumed their master was attending to a private matter inside the closed room. No one wanted to be the attendant who walked in on that. So they stood in the corridor and waited. Judges 3:25 records what followed with a dry precision that readers have noted across many centuries. They waited until they were embarrassed. The delay stretched past the point of comfort, past the point where something clearly felt wrong, and still no one moved. Eventually, someone retrieved a key and opened the door. Eglon was dead on the floor. That delay was not something Ehud had arranged. He could not have known how long the servants would hold back, or whether the awkwardness of the situation would give him the margin he needed. He had walked out without that knowledge. But the gap created by ordinary human hesitation, the entirely recognizable reluctance to interrupt a moment nobody wanted to interrupt, was exactly the space that carried him to safety. Judges 3:26 moves quickly. While they waited, Ehud escaped. He passed the stone images and reached Sirah in the hill country of Ephraim. He was out. He was clear. Ehud did not go home to rest. He did not pause to let the weight of what had just happened settle inside him. He climbed directly into the hill country of Ephraim, and there he blew a trumpet. Judges 3:27. He blew a trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went down with him from the hills, with him leading them. That long, carrying note of a ram's horn across the valleys was a signal people understood. Something has moved. Come now. And they came. Ehud told them plainly, "Follow me, for the Lord has given Moab, your enemy, into your hands." Notice the order. He did not say, "Follow me because of what I did." He did not name himself as the source of what had happened. The first thing out of his mouth was that the Lord had given this. He pointed the people toward God before he pointed them anywhere else. The trumpet was not a proclamation of Ehud. It was a call to respond to what God had already set in motion. The Israelites moved to the fords of the Jordan River and sealed every crossing point. No Moabite soldier could retreat across the water. No reinforcement could arrive from the eastern bank. The situation was total. Judges 3:29 records the outcome plainly. About 10,000 Moabites fell that day, all described as vigorous and strong. Not one escaped. And then Judges 3:30 closes the entire account in a single, unhurried sentence. So Moab was subjected to Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. 80 years. That number is the quiet center of the whole story, and it deserves more than a quick pass. 80 years means that a child born on the day Ehud blew that trumpet would grow up, marry, raise children of their own, grow old, and die. All within the span of that single piece. Their children would inherit it still. The grandchildren of people who had carried tribute under occupation for 18 years would spend their entire lives in a land at rest. They would not remember the weight that their grandparents had described at evening tables. They would know their land as their own, their harvests as their own, their decisions as their own, because of a single morning on a hill where a man lifted a ram's horn and pointed a people toward what God had done. That is not a small thing, and the Bible trusts you to hold the weight of it in that one number. After this, Ehud does not appear again. No monument in the narrative. No record of his later years. No final address. No position of ongoing authority. 16 verses. And then the text moves forward to the next judge, the next season, the next turn of the same cycle. He had done what was given him to do. And the text moved on. But before the text moves on, it is worth staying in that space for a moment. Because what this account leaves behind is not primarily a story about Ehud. It is a story about the kind of God who worked through him. Ehud's story sits inside the cycle that runs through the entire book of Judges. Turning away from God, living under the weight of the consequences, crying out, and God responding. That cycle is the backbone of the book. But it is important to hold what Judges is actually showing us when it repeats that pattern across so many generations and so many different people. It is not presenting Israel as a success story. It is not holding up any of the judges as moral examples to imitate without question. Judges is a record, honest, detailed, and willing to show you the rough edges. The purpose of that honesty is so that what God does inside those broken situations can be seen clearly. The focus of the book is never the deliverer. It is the God who raises up the deliverer. When the Israelites cried out in Judges 3:15, God did not wait for them to demonstrate they had earned a hearing. He did not require proof that things would be different this time. They cried, and He answered. He raised someone up. He worked through that person. He gave the land peace, not because the people had become worthy of it, but because that is the kind of God that this text consistently places before you. What Ehud carries in the biblical record is not a general principle about personal action. He was a specific instrument in a specific historical moment, operating within a specific kind of conflict during the period before Israel had a king. His story is not a template to apply to individual circumstances today. What it does carry is something more lasting, a picture of how God works, through people who are particular, who are ready, and who direct attention back to Him when the moment has passed. And the specific quality God worked through in Ehud is worth sitting with carefully. He did not use Ehud's left-handedness in spite of it. He used it as the mechanism the entire plan depended on. The sword went on the right side because of the left hand. The guards checked the left side as they always did. The blade was never found. The thing that in the eyes of some might have marked Ehud as out of place was the exact instrument the moment required. This is a pattern that appears more than once across Scripture. The thing set apart, the thing that does not fit the expected shape. These are often not obstacles to what God is doing. They are the means of it. The book of Judges also carries a truth that is harder to sit with than most people slow down to acknowledge. God works through very imperfect people in very broken situations, and the fruit of that work can outlast everyone involved by generations. Ehud did not see the 80 years. He saw 16 verses worth of one specific day and what immediately followed it. The peace that lasted 80 years was the fruit of his obedience in a moment. Fruit he never witnessed in its fullness. That gap between the faithful act and the full outcome it carries is worth holding. Much of what God builds through people is never seen by the people themselves. The seeds are planted by one generation. The shade reaches another. Ehud blew a trumpet on a hill. The peace lasted 80 years. He likely did not live to see how far it reached. There is also something in the nature of the cry recorded in verse 15 that deserves attention in its own right. The Hebrew word used there carries urgency and desperation, the sound of people who have genuinely run out of other options. This was not a formal petition submitted through proper religious channels. It was the cry of a generation that was tired and had nothing left to try. And God heard it. He acted on it. He raised someone up in direct response to it. The God of Judges is not a God who waits for polished prayers from people in stable circumstances. He hears from the difficult place, from the long season, from the generation that has been living under something heavy for longer than seemed bearable. That is not peripheral to Ehud's story. It is the center of it. Most people watching this will not find themselves in a situation that looks anything like an upper room in ancient Jericho. That is not the connection this story is offering. The connection is the 18 years. Almost everyone who has lived any length of life has experienced, or is currently in, a season that has gone on longer than seemed reasonable. A circumstance that has not turned despite genuine waiting, despite real effort. The 18 years in this account are not background detail. They are the entire context out of which God moved. He did not act in the 2nd year, or the 5th, or the 10th. He acted in the 18th. And when he acted completely. There is no timetable in this story. But there is a clear word about who God is in relation to people crying out from a long and difficult place. He hears. He responds. He raises someone up. The record in Judges is consistent on this across every generation it covers. A cry, and then a response. It is not a promise about speed. It is a revelation of character. And character does not change between the ancient world and now. Ehud's preparation also carries something worth holding onto directly. He made the blade before the day arrived. He was ready before the opportunity came into view. His readiness was not built on knowing the exact timing or the precise shape of what was ahead. He did not have that information. He prepared as though the moment could arrive at any point. And when it came, nothing was missing. That rhythm, readiness before the moment, preparation before the opportunity, appears throughout Scripture as a posture of faithfulness. The person who is prepared is the person who can act when the window opens. And the first words Ehud spoke after the moment had passed were not about himself. Follow me, because the Lord has given this. He pointed the people toward God before he pointed them toward anything else. When God does something in a life, when a hard stretch finally turns, when something breaks open after years of waiting, the first move is not inward. It is outward, toward the people around you who are still carrying their own weight, still waiting on their own answer, still needing to know that God hears and that he moves. This story raises a question that is worth carrying past the end of this video. Is there something in your own life that you have been treating as a limitation, something you have been quietly compensating for or apologizing for, that may be placed there for a reason that has not yet become clear? Ehud did not become right-handed. He worked with the hand he had, and that hand turned out to be the precise thing the moment required. And if you are currently in a stretch that has gone on far longer than seemed fair, one that has not turned despite genuine waiting and real effort, this story does not offer a timetable, but it does offer something solid to hold. God heard the cry. God raised someone up. God gave peace. That is what this text shows, generation after generation, across every cycle the book of Judges covers. It is a revelation of who God is, and who He is does not change. 16 verses. That is all Ehud gets in the biblical record. 16 verses in a book that spans centuries, covers generations, holds accounts of battle and betrayal and deliverance. He makes the blade, walks the road, carries the word, blows the trumpet, leads the people. And then the narrative moves on without him. No monument, no closing chapter, no summary of what he did with the rest of his years. And those 16 verses produced 80 years of peace. Think about what that ratio holds. The brevity of what is written and the weight of what it carried in real human time across real human generations. Those two things do not match by any ordinary measure. But that is consistently how God's work lands, quietly, specifically. Through a person no one in Eglon's court was watching, in a moment that looked from the outside like just another annual trip to pay the tribute. Ehud was not a flawless man. The Bible does not say he was. He was a specific man with a specific hand, ready at a specific moment. And God worked through him, the way God has always worked through people who are particular and available and willing to move when the moment comes. That is the kind of God this story presents. A God who sees what is overlooked. A God who hears from the difficult place. A God who builds things through quiet faithfulness that outlast everyone involved. And a God whose character remains the same across every generation that has read this text, including this one. He still works that way. He has not changed his approach. If this story left something with you, if one part of it landed differently than you expected, leave a comment below. Tell me which piece caught you. I read every one of them. And if this video was useful to you, a like helps other people find these stories who are looking for exactly this. If you want to keep going through Scripture this way, taking the text seriously, following where it actually leads, subscribe, and you will not miss what comes next. These stories were written down because they carry something that does not expire. We will keep going through them together.